I'm going to tell you it's incredibly challenging to balance. But I think the best way that I've tried to figure it out is to sort of segment specific days. So like these 2 days I'll be working in academia, these 2 days I'll be working in business, and then this day is like sort of general catch up for whatever's on fire at the moment. Hey, Ken here from STEM Venturist. This is a pre-recorded seminar that I gave all about science communication, about what does a science communication career look like, what does the path to science communication look like, as well as how do you transition into a non-academic role. And so this is the final piece, so number 4 of a 4-part series, and this is the Q&A section at the end of it. Hope you enjoy.
I guess so. While we wait, I have a question myself. It was really interesting to me that you mentioned that while you were doing your PhD, you got involved in like all of these different activities, like extracurricular activities. And one that really caught my attention was that you got involved with people that are cancer patients. And that really caught my attention in terms of like, you know, we do the lab work, but we might not feel as connected to the patients because we don't really have that interaction with them. How did that help you in your career and like also like giving you more direction into what you wanted to do in the future and what you wanted to pursue with your career?
Yeah, so I found it incredibly rewarding. So just for my YouTube purposes, the question was, how did you find communicating with advocates in your research base, which is cancer? So I found it incredibly rewarding for a number of different reasons. Firstly, the power or the importance of your research comes through incredibly strong when you're talking to someone who's affected by cancer in this context. So if you ever want a pickup of, you know, a boost to sort of keep you going to do those late nights of experiments, talk to someone who's affected by cancer and the research that you're doing directly affects them. It's an incredibly rewarding experience. It really keeps you motivated. But secondly, then it really begins to highlight some of the gaps in knowledge that are out there. So, you know, often we're talking to people that, you know, maybe they have a family, you know, friend that's affected, but you would sort of naturally think that someone who's been diagnosed with cancer is going through that process, that they would be a little bit more knowledgeable in the area. But you'd be surprised at how many fundamental knowledge gaps that they have. And yeah, you can really begin to see which parts that you need to focus on, and more importantly, which bits that you need to sort of communicate in a little bit of a more friendly and understanding way. And it really also brings you back to understanding what's the best way to approach things without upsetting someone or using a certain type of language that might offend someone who has cancer, for example. And I think the same would go for any type of research, but obviously cancer is something that's a little bit, you know, different because it is very impactful in terms of, you know, the impact it can have on someone's life. So I found it incredibly rewarding, and if you can do it, I definitely recommend doing it. And some ways to do that would be reach out to advocacy groups on social media, look for your advocacy bodies within your specific cancer type if you're doing cancer or general field. They'll often be looking for people to go give talks, so maybe you can go and give a presentation there. And it's really beginning to build those networks which you'll develop over time. And not only will that be useful for your science communication, but it'll also be really useful for funding. So you might have noticed that there's a big trend, particularly here in Australia, of having consumer involvement in the medical research sector. And a lot of this times you need to have sort of consumer involvement or have involved with talking to the consumers, which in this sense would be cancer patients or people affected by cancer. And so this helps you build up that network so that when you go to write that grant, you're in that position to be able to, you know, call on those people you have close contacts with who you know will be able to give you honest advice, and it'll help make your grant look a little bit more solid and show that you're really committed down that path. So I think the back end of that question was, what was the back end of the question? I forgot. Or did that answer your question?
Answer my question.
Okay.
So good. Thank you so much. We have another question from Ashley, and she's asking that being half academia, half communication, what does a typical week or month look like? How much time does you spend in the lab, and how do you separate these two jobs?
Yep. So what is my time schedule being a point 0.5 academic and a point 0.5 business owner? I'm going to tell you it's incredibly challenging to balance, but I think the best way that I've tried to figure it out is to sort of segment specific days. So like these 2 days I'll be working in academia, these 2 days I'll be working in business, and then this day is like sort of general catch up for whatever's on fire at the moment. Now I'm in a little bit of a better position because I've obviously got a couple of funds which have helped me have a research assistant that can physically do the experiments. If I was having to have to do the experiments myself, I think it would be very challenging. But then again, maybe the stress is a little bit less reduced because then you can go in and just get them done. But for me, I'm sort of like in that sort of like early lab headish type role, I guess, where I'm sort of running some independent projects under the support of a larger lab. So my sort of academic role in point 0.5 will either be, liaising with my research assistant to try and get experiments across, or writing more papers, writing more grants. I would say it's incredibly hard to keep on top of the literature because if you read the literature, you're breaking down or losing the other time of the other stuff. So I think, again, I've also been fortunate in the sense that I have built up very strong project ideas, of which a few of them are funded. So I think I'm pretty comfortable for the next few years to not have to worry about being on top of the literature to come up with new ideas, because I've sort of have spent a lot of time developing ideas that have been somewhat funded. But I can definitely see that it's having an impact on me having my finger on the pulse of the field. In terms of the business, it's been incredibly rewarding because being an entrepreneur is like this whole, you pretty much have to do everything. So from doing admin to business to creating the products to building your network, and it's been really fun to learn like a completely new different skill set from scratch. And if you've ever heard of this 80-20 rule, it takes about 20% of the effort to get to 80% of the knowledge, or 80% of the outcome. And so because you're jumping into a completely new field, you have this rapid, learning experience, which is just really fun to be able to absorb so much more. So I found it really interesting just learning these business skill sets. And importantly, I think there's really good transferability between the stuff I'm learning in the business and how I can actually improve my academic role, both from communications, pitch decks, to managing, to a whole variety of different ways of thinking about it in a different setting. So it's definitely complex, but it's fun.
Awesome, thank you for that. We have another question. They're asking, do you have any tips for a 24-year-old Buma looking to establish a social media presence from scratch?
Yeah, that's it's a good one. I think pretty much you just need to get on it. I don't think it really matters what age you're at. Maybe it does in the sense that, if you're picking a certain social media platform, maybe age might be a concern. But even then, I don't think it really is. I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve with your social media. So are you trying to reach other scientists? Are you trying to reach the general public? Or are there some particular audience, whether that's business specific or blah, blah, blah. So you really need to narrow down what the audience is first. And I would say for most academics, your best approach is to target other academics. And the reason for that is that A, they're going to more likely to follow you back so you can build your network quicker. But there is this, phenomenon that happens that once you begin to get a certain following size, that you naturally get more of the general community beginning to follow you as well. Not at a high percentage, but they say that in one study of PhDs in, I think, environmental science, from memory, they did this analysis where they break down how many followers that were other scientists, how many followers were other scientists versus the general community. And as you get to about 1,000 followers, in this context, Twitter, that was the sweet spot or sweet number to aim for, that you would get, probably like 80% other scientists, but then 20% of other general community or policymakers or journalists and stuff like that. And if you go higher than that, that sort of ratio begins to stay the same. So I would say, target other academics, unless you're specifically looking to transition out of academia, or you really want to build up a skill set in science communication, talking to other members of the community. So I would just say, think about what your goals are and then figure out which platform is where that audience is going to be. And for academics, that's probably Twitter or LinkedIn. They're the two that I recommend that you definitely invest time in. But then there could be other audiences. Just really depends on what you're trying to do.
Awesome. We still have 2 more questions. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So the second one is, how did you start to improve your communication style post 3-minute thesis?
Well, if you're going by the 3MT that I did very early in my career, I don't think I really had a communication style at that point. It was more just, I think that was probably one of my first public outreach talks that I ever gave. So I say it wouldn't have changed much. But to tweak that question to give you a better response, I would say that things have changed over time. I think initially I probably focused a little bit more on the nitty gritty rather than the broader impact. And I think over time I've learned how to sort of minimalize my message, so make it a little bit more less condensed, easy to understand, and focus more on the impact. And from presentation style wise, as you can see from this slide deck, I've really gone a complete different direction where I prefer to use images with very minimal text. Obviously a little bit different within academic talks, but I try to keep to this style as much as I can. Obviously with academia you need more graphs and stuff like that, but trying to reduce the text load on slides. So they're probably 2 big changes that I've done over time. Other than that, just learning to be a bit more energetic and a bit more bubbly, because I think whenever you get into that sort of work mode, you can get into I'm very serious and I'm talking, and it just comes across a little bit bland, and you can really just have a lot of fun with academia. So trying to add a bit of fun and juice, maybe a couple of memes here and there, I think that's probably what I've changed.
Thank you. And our last question is, I know that in science communication, social media can play a huge part in building your profile. Which socials did you find to be most effective? Like, for example, Twitter versus LinkedIn versus Instagram versus YouTube?
Yeah. So I would say probably the most effective would be Twitter and LinkedIn, and that's why I recommended that before. Twitter, because it's very low effort entry to get in there. All you need to write is a couple of words. And it's a really easy way to target other academics because you can just search people and follow them, particularly within your specific industry, and the chance of them following back is really high. LinkedIn is also useful, but I use that more as like a business card, a digital business card. So I'll keep it there, and if I meet someone at a conference, back when you used to meet in person, I would sort of give them an invitation, and then I'd be able to track them down later in life whenever I sort of needed that contact or ability to connect with them, because the conversation was there and there's a relationship built. Whereas trying to compare it to a physical business card, you probably lose it within a year, or then maybe there's no digital footprint that they don't know who you are, so then you have to spend that time trying to communicate. But with LinkedIn, it's really good because it's got a dialogue of when you first meet, and then if you follow that up with the introduction message of saying, hey, I met you at this conference, we were talking about such and such, it would be good to stay in touch. If you've done that at the start, and even if you approach them 3 years later, they'll see that at the top of the message and they'll know why the reason that they're reaching out to you. So Instagram, I'm pretty new to it, as well as YouTube. So I've only been doing my YouTube channel since November. Obviously the effort is a lot higher and it's a very long-term game. So I would say only think about YouTube if it's something that you think is going to be useful for you to build up your presence or as part of your career. But I'd say for most people, it's probably a little bit excessive and just a lot of work. Instagram, yeah, I'm new to it, so I can't really comment on it, but Twitter and LinkedIn is what I'd go with. Hey, hopefully you enjoyed this 4-part series all about science communication. If you missed any of the previous videos in this series, click up here, or if you want to see the latest video, check down here. Catch you next time.